I am taking it away then. I am Bruce Resnick, the Executive Director of Los Angeles Waterkeeper. Thank you all for joining or listening later as I talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is the nexus between water policy and climate, which a lot of people don't actually understand how interrelated those are. And so I am going to start my PowerPoint and we will see how this goes. Am I sharing screen? Can I get a thumbs up? Excellent. So as I told Chloe before this, I made the mistake of not pre-printing my presentation notes. So we're going to test my memory of how well I remember my 30 slides as we go through this. Also a warning, there's a lot I wanted to cover. There's so many pieces that are interrelated between kind of climate justice and water. And I debated cutting it down, but I figured this is a good audience, so I'm just gonna try to power through. There's definitely a lot of information and you can always feel free to reach out. So we are Los Angeles Waterkeeper. I know we are not a group that is well known as many, but we kind of like it that way. We're the sort of lean, mean fighting machine protecting our inland and coastal waterways throughout LA County. And as said, I am Bruce Resnick, the Executive Director. I'm an environmental attorney by training, but really mostly just run the organization. Angelino, native, born in the Valley, and have spent most of my life living up and down throughout California and back the last 5 years running LA Waterkeeper, but I've actually been part of the Waterkeeper movement for actually much longer than that, which I will get to. And I'm having a hard time getting my slides to move. Hold on. Why am I getting a hard time? This has not happened before. There it goes. So starting off with the Waterkeeper story. So Los Angeles Waterkeeper has been around for about 27 years now. We were formed by a gentleman, Terry Tamminen, who is actually on that boat in the top picture, on what was not only our patrol boat, but our office for the first several years of the organization. And from the time we were founded, we really were known as sort of the Aqua Cop, the group that was out on the water fighting for the health of Santa Monica Bay and all the waterways that feed into Santa Monica Bay. And it's important to know that we're actually part of a much larger movement. We're part of something known as the International Waterkeeper Alliance. And I don't have time to go into the long history of Waterkeeper Alliance today, but suffice it to say, like many environmental groups, it really dates back to the late 1950s, the 1960s, and in this case, it was along the Hudson River, and a bunch of commercial fishermen who had made their livings for generations as commercial fishermen came back to the Hudson, often after fighting in things like the Korean War, and came back, and the Hudson was dying. It literally became illegal to catch and sell fish on the Hudson. And these group of fishermen organized themselves and they got together and they really were talking at town halls about doing stuff that today we would call eco-terrorism, of going into outfall pipes and in industrial facilities and sending dynamite in a dinghy up them or stuffing them with outfall with mattresses and lighting it on fire, all sorts of kind of crazy things, because it literally was their livelihoods and their livelihoods for generations that were being threatened. And luckily, saner heads prevailed and people got together and said, no, we should not be abusing the law, we should be enforcing the law. And they started suing polluters and restoring the Hudson, which is actually one of the great restoration things that we know about. The Hudson has actually come back to life. And with that model, Waterkeepers started popping up all over the country. And LA Waterkeeper, known originally as Santa Monica Baykeeper, was the 10th program. And what we're really founded on is, being out on the water, being our patrol, and now we have our new boat is on the bottom left photo, being out there, the eyes and the ears on the waterway, connected with our waters, being locally based, so every Waterkeeper looks different based on their community and the community needs. And lastly, the group that tends to sue polluters. It's what we are most known for. And that's who the waterkeepers are. And you look at the bottom picture, there's now 350 waterkeepers all over the world. This is at our 10th anniversary event. And many people say it also takes a little bit of craziness. That is a waterkeeper sturgeon tattoo. About 50 members, I'm not one of them, about 50 or 60 waterkeepers have the sturgeon tattoo. So it's definitely a group that is very passionate about protecting our waterways. So in terms of our work, we organize it in really three main areas: pollution prevention, healthy habitats, and systems change. And pollution prevention is really just stopping the sewage spills, the urban runoff, the stuff that's kind of getting into our waterways. It's, in a medical analogy, it's kind of the triage. You need to stop the bleeding before you can do anything else. But that's just the beginning. You also need to actually restore those ecosystems, coastal, marine, inland, riparian back to health. And lastly, and the part that really ties most closely with talking about climate justice, is really systems change. It's about how and where we get our water and how we design our communities. So we've just been an organization, for a small organization of 7 staff of lawyers and scientists and outreach folks. We've had a huge impact. Some of our lawsuits, we forced the city to invest $2 billion in its sewage system and reduce spills 90%. We've had cases go all the way up to the Supreme Court fighting for stronger urban runoff. We've had enforcement actions against over 50 industrial facilities that discharge polluted stormwater. You see somebody collecting samples there. And actually, not only have we gotten those facilities cleaned up, but those groups have had to reinvest more than $1 million into local projects to undo the harm done. So with that, a little bit about kind of why we're in the mess we're in LA when it comes to water and climate, and what we can be doing about it and must be doing about it. So just recognizing that most of our work, not all of our work, but most of our work in LA, there are other tribes, is really on the ancestral land of the Tonga, particularly our work around the LA River. It's just always good to acknowledge that. And so you see right off what the problem is. This is LA. I mean, we started growing as a region even, starting around the turn of the last century, on the early 1900s. And so we started to build out, you started to add concrete, lose open space, which means you have more and more runoff, you don't have water filtering in. And you combine that with building right on what was the LA River, it's not too hard to imagine what is going to happen. And starting really in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s, it became very abundant what would happen, which is we had massive flooding. We had very wet El Nino years, many, many deaths. And it wasn't just the LA River, it happened in Bayona, it happened in San Gabriel Valley. And so, with that, what we decided to do was to really pave over paradise and kind of lead us in this downward spiral where, the original thought was, well, we've got too many people living too close to an area where we've built out, overly built out. So we just have to move water as quickly as possible. So the first thing was just channelizing every river, LA River, Bayona, pretty much all of our waterways are channelized to get rid of water as quickly as possible. And then we built our storm drain system so that water in streets goes into storm drains untreated and into our rivers, creeks, and ultimately the ocean. And then with that, we said, oh, great, we're getting rid of our water so quickly, we can just keep building, and we can add parking lots and structures and highways and on, and just keep exacerbating the problem. And so what has that led us to? Well, it's led us to the fact that in LA County, we have to import about 60% of our water. And of course, most of you are familiar probably with Mulholland, and if you've ever watched the movie Chinatown, should, if you haven't, or read Cadillac Desert, you understand that we are pulling water from all over the state and all over the Western region, from Northern California through the State Water Project, through the LA Aqueduct, also from the Sierras, including the Colorado River, and all these waterways have other communities that depend on them. And so, I often put the, I'm sure illegally, don't tell anybody, the Simpsons alien on this slide, because an old friend of mine from Surfrider once said, if an alien was looking down at the United States or California or LA, and they had to understand water, they would actually think water was a toxic substance, because all we seem to want to do is move it away from us as quickly as possible, channelize our rivers, have a storm drain system. And we fail to miss that water is literally the most precious life-sustaining resource we have. And it really is the cycle of insanity of water. And so on to kind of what the problem statement, I'll go back for a second, the saying, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Well, I think it's safe to say our water system is broken. And this was a report card that UCLA did last year as part of their IOES program. And they've been doing different sectors, energy, and you can see surface water quality, rivers, coastal waters, the bay, creeks, gets a D. That's a lot of what we work on at LA Waterkeeper. But up and down, water energy nexus, C+. And frankly, I actually think UCLA was being generous in most of these grades. Probably not surface water is probably right on, but many of the others, I actually think that we're being generous. Some of the factoids, this is going to be the memory test for me. 85% of waterways in LA County are listed as impaired under the Federal Clean Water Act for one pollutant or another: metals, toxins, pesticides, herbicides, bacteria, total suspended solids, the list goes on and on. As I mentioned, virtually every waterway, every inland waterway has been channelized. We have trash going down into our waterways to the point where a lot of experts are estimating that by 2050, plastics are going to outweigh fish in the ocean. We have every day in LA, even on dry days, about 100 million gallons of contaminated runoff goes into our inland waters and coastal waters. During a storm event, it can be 5 billion to 10 billion gallons, and that should be water that would be recharging our aquifers. We have about 500 million gallons a day of treated sewage. And again, remember, we're importing this water, we're treating it once, we're getting rid of it. I call it a pump and dump approach to water. Other people talk about a single-use water. And we invest so much in this water, and then we treat it again, and then we discharge 500 million gallons a day into the ocean, and another 50 or some odd million gallons a day into our inland waterways, like the LA River. It's actually most of the flow of the LA River. Obviously, these decisions are having massive impacts on the Colorado River, the San Joaquin and Sacramento, the American rivers up in Northern California, the Sierras, Owen Valley, Owen Lake. We are still massively reliant. 60% of our water is imported, meaning, we're one earthquake away or natural disaster from not having a local water supply. We haven't invested in our infrastructure, so costs are going up. And then, I think one of the most insidious things, and really the topic of today, is the water-related energy use. The water sector, that's not just the movement of water from Northern California to Colorado, but the treatment of water, the movement within the city, the heating of water. It is actually the single largest user of electricity in the state. It's about 20% of all electricity consumption, 30% of all natural gas. And here's a nice breakdown of where that exactly comes from. And so, I like to tell folks, certainly addressing climate change is more than just water. But if you're not tackling water, it's really hard to get to climate change, climate justice, because it is such a big piece of the pie. And I'll have some more evidence suggesting how big an impact that can have in a second. And so now that I'm through the really depressing part, I've still got about 17 minutes on what is a smarter water approach and what we can and should, and in LA largely are doing about this because of groups like LA Waterkeeper and many of our partners, and some really forward-looking elected officials and agency officials. So just to restate, the areas we work in: pollution prevention, healthy habitat, systems change. I'm going to blow through the first two pretty quickly because it's not as directly tied, but I thought it was sort of good for context. So pollution prevention, I talked about sewage spills. We've had huge successes. Point source, but really the main problem is now urban runoff. It's the #1 source of pollution. It is what comes from our roads, our homes. It brings herbicides and pesticides. It brings plastics. It brings metals from our industrial facilities. One of the reasons I want to bring it up is just highlighting it and what the solutions are, but also 2021 in particular is going to be a really important year because there are permits that get renewed every 5 to 10 years that regulate runoff from all these different facilities, including schools, roads, construction sites, municipalities, commercial sites, industrial. Almost all of them are coming up for renewal or adoption next year. So this is for folks that are really interested in this, just getting engaged with our agency officials is really crucial. I also wanted to point out that, not all pollution is equal. In industrial facilities, we tend to have hotspots of where our industrial facilities are. This up at the top is Sun Valley, Pacoima. Then you've got sort of the Alameda corridor running along the LA River, and then you've got sort of the port communities, which is where most of our industrial pollution is. And obviously, these are very much frontline communities. And I just want to bring this up again, because one of the key programs that LA Waterkeeper does, we actually do a lot of industrial enforcement. We try to get these facilities into compliance, but also to reinvest back in communities. It is typically, in a world that is not impacted by COVID, one of the great volunteer opportunities that we have within LA Waterkeeper, because we actually have to go down in the middle of the night, when in the middle of rainstorms, and collect water samples. And we do that through a program called Community Water Watch, where we actually train and engage volunteers. So I would encourage folks that are interested to keep following up. We're obviously on hiatus. We're doing that as a volunteer program. We're still going to be out there, but not taking volunteers during COVID, but hopefully by at least 2021 wet season, we'll be fully back up and running. The next area is, okay, once you stop the pollution, you got to restore our ecosystems back to health. We work on the marine area with again, one of our great volunteer programs that we're not doing as volunteer right now, which is our marine protected area MPA watch program, where we go out 60 to 70 times a year. We're often working with schools and students that are coming from underserved or at-risk communities, getting them into sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And we're basically patrolling the coastal waters and making sure there's not illegal activity, making sure there's not illegal fishing in these marine protected areas that are protected, are kind of state parks of the ocean. And that's a program that we are still actively going out. It's actually more crucial than ever because of lack of enforcement with COVID, and frankly, more people kind of getting in the water that don't have as much expertise. We're actually seeing more violations of our marine protected areas. There have been a lot of stories recently about some of our tide pools getting wiped out. And so it's actually more important than ever that we are out on the waterways. And we also obviously work not only in the marine environment, but in the coastal and our inland. And one of the big areas there is the LA River. And again, this is what our LA River is. It's fully channelized. And I bring this up as well because for one reason, the LA River, which is something I'm very passionate about. I grew up not far from the river where it starts in the valley. But rivers have a way of connecting communities and disparate communities throughout a region. And it says something about LA that the way we connect our communities is through this concrete channel that most people don't even treat or even realize is a river. And yet, again, we're talking about climate justice. It's challenging because if we green the LA River, if we pull that concrete, we naturalize it, we put green spaces along the river, and a lot of groups are working towards that, we can really have an impact on climate. We can get carbon sequestration, we can get cooling, which is tremendous. At the same time, we still have the same problem of communities having been built along the LA River in a climate change world where we're probably going to have fewer storms but more severe. We have the threat of flooding those communities. And so how do we figure out that climate balance where we are naturalizing the river, getting back to a river which could have benefits for climate change, carbon sequestration, but do it in a way that isn't impacting those communities that are probably going to be even more impacted in a climate change world. And of course, one of the ways we'll be getting to is to really go throughout the watershed. And this is the last kind of LA River before I get into the systems change. And I asked you earlier to remember that where those industrial hotspots. So this this on the left is sort of the LA River, kind of Glendale Narrows, and through downtown along the Alameda corridor down to Long Beach, the port communities. This is environmental, the Cal Enviro screen, which shows our most impacted communities for pollution load and socioeconomic factors. And again, you think of your rivers usually as these sort of lifebloods of communities in most places. And because of what we've done to our river, it actually basically mirrors these most impacted deep red communities that are our frontline communities. And if you can remember back where those industrial sites were, it's Sun Valley and Pacoima, it's along the Alameda corridor and down by the port communities, and something that we absolutely have to change. I'll leave this up for just a second as I catch my breath for folks to read, but I've got a lot to cover on systems change in 10 minutes. So just to say that really, even with the challenges around how we green the LA River without impacting neighboring communities, it is something that I think is absolutely essential, and we certainly can use all the help we can get in that if folks are interested. So then systems change. So really a lot of our work is focusing, and there's some great things going on in LA around what we call the 4R approach to water, which is where we should get our water: reduce, reuse, recycle, restore. Part of our systems change work is also focusing on more government accountability, building public and political will, and integrating planning efforts throughout LA. So with that, and this is a slide I referred to earlier, which is meant to show how closely water and energy are. So during the height of the drought, you may remember that we reduced water usage 25% in the state by mandate. And we met our goal. And places like LA in particular were doing really, really good. We've had some backsliding since then, but not a lot. And what this slide shows, this came out of UC Davis, Dr. Frank Loge, their water energy center, entire center devoted to this water energy nexus. On the left is all the electricity savings from all of our traditional energy efficiency programs. So, air conditioning, low flow, or low energy appliances, LED lighting, all that. The blue is what we accomplished by saving water. By our 25%, we actually had more electricity savings from that 25% reduction in water than we did from all the other electricity traditional measures combined. And this on the right is the cost. It was actually a fraction of the cost, about a third of the cost. And so it just shows you how much, if we are doing smart, sane water policy, we can have an impact on climate. And I would say even at the peak, even at the 25% reduction, we still are not, even though we're doing a good job, we are still not a worldwide best practice. We aren't where Australia is or Israel or other places. We still have probably another 20%, 30% we could be getting in California, in LA. So then stormwater, one of my favorite things and something I'm hugely involved with. So one of the most multi-benefit things that we can do to enhance local water, so the reuse part, is capture the rainwater that we do get, whether it's a big storm, whether it's slow trickles. We can do big projects where we actually capture lots and lots of water, where we have really good soils that infiltrate and right above our groundwater basins. And those are called spreading grounds, and you see a picture of where those are. And we're doing that, and there's still more opportunities, particularly in the San Fernando Valley for that. San Gabriel does a really good job of that. There's also a lot of smaller, greening your schools. This is called a curb cut, where the water can go off in a storm and just into your normal garden. There's capturing water coming off roofs. There's just a million kind of projects. And really what they almost all are, it's almost all just about creating more green space, pulling up concrete, something that 30 years ago, one of the leading environmentalists, probably the matriarch of the environmental community in LA, the late Dorothy Green, who founded Heal the Bay and other groups, created a movement called Unpave LA. And that's really what it's about, creating more green space. And one of the great opportunities there is you're not only cleaning up stormwater, you're capturing it, you're letting it infiltrate, so you're recharging aquifers, so it's a local source of water, but you're greening communities. So all those impacts that aren't stormwater related, but that come from having too much concrete, so urban heat island, air quality, increased flooding in communities, all of that can get corrected by green, nature-based stormwater projects. And LA Waterkeeper, with many, many partners, everything we do, we have a lot of partners. I'd like to point that out. We were instrumental in the county passing Measure W a couple years ago, the Safe Clean Water Program, which is going to invest $280 million a year into stormwater projects. And these are supposed to be multi-benefit stormwater projects that improve water quality, enhance local water supply, and green local communities. I'm actually currently the chair of the 6-member scoring committee that ranks these projects. The first round, we got 58 applications. I think 48 or some were moving on, and we allocated, I think, about $380 million over the first 5 years of the program. We have up to $280 million per year, but we wanted to hold some of that money waiting to see if you can get better projects that came forward. I'm also on one of the 9 watershed committees that also decides after scoring where this money goes. This is a game changer. This, if done right, and it still needs to be improved, and we are working with our partners in our Water LA Coalition to make sure we have stronger requirements around investing in disadvantaged communities, in those nature-based solutions, and providing community benefits. This can really reshape LA as we know it, and it's something I'm just tremendously excited about. Third, recycle. We can take that 500 million gallons a day of already highly treated wastewater, treat it a little bit better than it's treated now, and use it to augment our local supplies, recycle our water, put it back into our groundwater. And many of you may have seen several months back, Mayor Garcetti announced that the city, and I've got a picture of the Hyperion treatment plant, the city of LA is planning to recycle 100% of its wastewater. So it discharges about 230 million gallons a day from Hyperion. Technologically, they have to keep some water, but we think they can get to about 180 million gallons a day beyond what's currently being recycled. They already recycle some. That's a massive amount of water, 180 million gallons a day, and that is supposed to happen over the next 20 years. Now, what wasn't as mentioned as prominently as we actually filed the lawsuit against the State Water Board over permits for Hyperion, basically arguing that discharge of sewage was a waste and unreasonable use of water, which actually is against what the California Constitution actually has a requirement that water is so precious in California we cannot waste it or unreasonably use it. So, you know, whether our lawsuit, which we prevailed on, was one of the drivers, or Garcetti just was doing the right thing, and we are happy that we were pushing on that as well. And then on the left, another project, the second really large wastewater facility, which is based in Carson and discharges about several miles off the coast here in Palos Verdes. They are also doing a pilot project. They discharge about 280 million gallons a day. They are doing a pilot project to recycle about 150 million gallons of that, and pretty much on the same timeline as Hyperion, but it still has a lot of key votes even this year to get the funding to start the environmental review and the project at Metropolitan Water District. And so we continue to play a role there. We've let them know that that same lawsuit we brought over this facility could be brought this facility if we don't get them moving forward on that. So they are well aware. But it's tremendously exciting the way we are rethinking our infrastructure. And last, and certainly not least, I just put it last because most people know reduce, reuse, recycle, and so I just add restore at the end, is we've got to clean up our contaminated groundwater, because that's where we're actually putting most of this water, whether it's capturing our stormwater or recycling our wastewater. It's got to go back into our existing groundwater. And luckily, LA is blessed with tremendous groundwater resources. And so unfortunately, the LA River heavily contaminated, largely from aerospace and a lot of industry that was in the valley back in the day. Central Basin has some contamination. West Coast Basin, which is also shown here, actually has a lot of saltwater intrusion, so you can do brackish desalination. And again, very exciting. A lot of recycling projects are already happening in these areas so that we can actually start to clean up our existing water supply from our groundwater, which is right now just a wasted resource, and then also open up space in that ground, in our basins and our aquifers, to put the stormwater that we capture and the wastewater that we recycle. So then, I'm getting that 5-minute warning. I'm getting close to the end, I promise. So doing the right thing is not enough. We actually have to avoid doing the really stupid things. And there's a couple that we fight. One we fight more than the other. So I'll talk about the twin tunnels first, which is one of my very, very favorite cartoons. This is Jerry Brown, who was, when he was governor, was a big advocate. This is how we get our water currently from Northern California, through the Bay Delta, through these big massive tunnels and the State Water Project. And we want to see ourselves weaning off. And yet there have been these efforts to put these massive tunnels, which they say is about protecting the Delta, but we fear is more about bringing more water from up north to either LA or honestly more likely to agricultural sources in the Central Valley, which actually is 80% of California's water, where our urban areas only use about 20%. So we're not as involved. It's mostly statewide groups. But again, if you keep investing in bringing more and more water down, there's less money, but there's also less political will and less public support for doing local projects, which is really what is going to enhance our communities. And lastly, West Basin, or DSAL, and there's a water agency called West Basin that's pursuing a 20 million gallon a day plan. I don't think I put any more detail in here, but ocean desalination is the most energy intensive way to get water. So it's literally the only thing that takes more energy than pumping water 400 miles over the Tehachapi Mountains, which is where we get our water from the Bay Delta now. We estimate that if West Basin builds this plant, it's going to add about 44,000 metric tons of carbon into the atmosphere every year at a time when we can't be affording it. And I would also argue West Basin is a water agency, and this is kind of a map of their service territory that represents, many frontline communities that are heavily impacted that frankly tend to be very good water savers. So Inglewood and Carson and places like that. And they also represent some of the wealthiest communities like Malibu and down in PV, Rolling Hills Estate and Palos Verdes Estates that are big water wasters. And so desal is one of the most expensive water options too. It's about $3,000 an acre foot, which means it's 2 to 3 times more expensive than virtually all the other water options I've talked about. And so basically by building this project that's going to go on the water bills for folks, they're basically making these frontline inland communities subsidize the water waste that's happening in places like Malibu and PV. So it's a huge equity issue. It's a huge climate driver. So a few parting thoughts in my last, I think, 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes. It really starts with a vision and prioritizing where your water comes from. And thankfully, I think a lot of people in LA, I've worked in Sacramento, I've worked in San Diego, where I don't think we had as much vision. We do in LA, and I think we've got an NGO community, a nonprofit, that is also has a lot of great vision about what we need to be doing. And so that's a good starting point. We need to be thinking small. And what I mean by that is it is going to take, yes, some big solutions like water recycling, but it's going to be a lot of small, building more parks, greening our schools, greening our streets, green alleyways, that combined collectively are going to be massive impacts, but individually they're very small community-based projects. Back to the future, just again, we're really trying to recreate Mother Nature before we kind of messed around with it and paved over everything, and try to get back in touch with nature. Laws of people versus laws of nature. I just say this because a lot of times water is extremely complex. We have 200 water agencies, we have water rights laws. It is an incredibly complex issue, and a lot of people say, oh, we can't do that. We've got too many water agencies. Oh, it's too hard to change water rights. It's easier to change the laws of people than the laws of nature, which is water's heavy. Pumping it hundreds of miles takes a lot of energy. Getting salt out of water takes a lot of energy. We can do this. If we have to change the laws of people, that's a lot easier than changing physics. And then lastly, and kind of tied to this, don't suffer from a failure of imagination. I mean, one of the things I'm excited about is, thankfully, because of the leadership of people like Mayor Garcetti and Supervisor Kuehl and others, who's a big architect on Measure W, and Supervisor Solis around our parks measure, we really are transforming LA. But we need a good push from us as well, the NGO community and LA Waterkeeper. Lastly, this is my last slide. It's got my email address if anybody wants to reach me. I just realized it doesn't have our website, which is obviously just lawaterkeeper.org. We are in the process of redoing our website. I think it's the best now, but hopefully in a month it'll be better. This is just a quote I always love from a dear friend, the departed Peter Douglas, who helped found and headed the Coastal Commission forever, that talks about why groups like advocacy groups like LA Waterkeeper are so important. And what I would say with this last slide, as you're kind of looking at that, my time is just about up now, is one of the questions I was asked was how can people get engaged? And unfortunately, as I mentioned, with COVID, a lot of our more traditional programs like Community Water Watch, like MPA Watch, we don't have the volunteers that we normally do. And really a lot of our work is being sort of the eyes and ears on the water in our communities. We hope that comes back sometime in 2021. But there are a lot of ways to get involved in sort of a civic engagement way. There's, as I mentioned, permits coming up. There's, a hearing coming up at the county around the Safe Clean Water program and what direction we want to go in. So probably in the near term, those are the ways that probably need the most attention and the most support. And so if you're interested in that, hopefully as we do our website, we'll have more information about when upcoming hearings and things like that. Get on our email list. We tend to publicize it. We tend to put it on our social media, which I realize should also be on here, or just email me. And we can get you that information for anybody that really is interested in sort of that civic engagement side of the work we do. And with that, I think I am done, just a minute or two late, and I will stop sharing and be back to my full self.
Awesome.
And I think I'm opening up for any questions, correct?
Yes, please. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to chat them, or there are only a couple of us here. You can unmute if you want. But Bruce, that was really impressive considering you ran without your script. So thank you for that super informative presentation. So yeah, I'm really bummed. You have some really cool citizen science opportunities that, like, I know I would love to get involved with now, but as a student, that sounds amazing. I'm curious, do you guys do internships for students at all? Can students get involved with you in that way?
So we do sometimes we do through our programs, and we will put that information up on our website, and we will sometimes post it on local boards. I check with my staff. I don't think we have any open internships now. I have to say, most of our internships are frankly around our legal program, so law school students, so we definitely take a lot of internships. But we will around our programs on occasion. We've had watershed interns, we've had marine interns in the past. Usually with very specific skill sets of like data management or GIS or things like that. So yeah, just check out our website, and we do post those. But like I said, I check with staff, and then we don't have anything open currently.
Well, that also kind of leads into my next question. I was going to ask, what kind of advice would you give to students who are looking to get into this work professionally? And you just touched on a couple of those things in terms of maybe like skills or fields of study or other types of volunteering or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like pretty much everything in our world, it is so different in a COVID world. It really is, because I think this is the first time I've been asked this question in our environment today. And so I have to admit, I don't have a great answer, because my answer almost always has been get involved. So much is really, decide what field you like. Obviously, we're a small staff, like we're 7 now, but I'm hoping that we can grow after, things bounce a little bit with COVID, back up to 9 or 10 staff, which is kind of where I'd like to be. And we tend to have very specialized skill sets, attorneys, scientists with masters or PhDs, things like that. And so obviously that is very helpful, but we do also have folks that are, more just kind of coming out of undergrad, and a lot of times do our outreach programs or things like that. But really, I think the best way is to just be persistent and volunteer and be around at events, because it's so much of it is relationship, and all of that is so much harder in a COVID world. And so I think it's probably just kind of reaching out. And what I tell people, students is, be a pest. Not everybody likes it, but it's a hard world. It's hard to break into this. And I know, and this may be different for LA Waterkeeper because we're an advocacy group, and even our folks that are doing programmatic work, like our MPA watch, it's about advocacy, about getting people to stop violating the requirements of our MPA, or our volunteer programs, community water watch. Yeah, it's about collecting samples, but it's about collecting samples, and we use those to sue industrial facilities. So I tend to like people that are aggressive. So to me, it's, maybe a pain if I'm getting, 5 emails from somebody, but I actually looked at it as a positive, because I'm like, okay, if they're willing to be aggressive, that's the kind of people I want out and representing LA Waterkeeper. So I don't, I would say do the best you can in connecting and following up and engaging, knowing that, obviously in a COVID world, it's a lot harder than it was in a pre-COVID world, but, this too shall pass. And at some point we'll be able to actually have programs again and interact and be at outreach events and all that fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that answer. We are running a little bit over, so I am probably gonna cut off our Q&A for right now and stop the recording. But thank you so much. And you don't have to leave quite yet, but I do want to stop the recording. But everyone will post all the LA Waterkeeper information in the YouTube caption, where you'll be able to see that if you're watching this. So thank you for joining us for this presentation.
Thank you.
Okay.